There's a road in a forgotten American town where people still cross to the other side of the street after dark. At the very end of that road sits a dying house with its windows sealed shut, its paint peeling like old scars, and a rusted gate nobody has touched in years. Parents used to scare their children with stories about the woman who lived inside. They called her dangerous, unstable, crazy. Some claimed they heard screaming at night. Others swore nobody had seen her leave the house in over a decade. But the strangest part of the story was this: nobody ever checked if any of it was true. Then one freezing October morning, a poor girl with holes in her shoes stopped outside that gate and made a decision that would uncover a secret worth millions of dollars. A secret buried for over 30 years. And before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Her name was Emily Carter, and at 22 years old, life had already worn her down in ways most people twice her age couldn't understand. She lived in a tiny apartment above a laundromat with her mother, worked 3 exhausting jobs, and survived on coffee, determination, and the stubborn belief that somehow things would get better. Her father had died 2 years earlier after collapsing during a double shift at the steel plant where he had worked since he was 19. Emily still remembered the way the company manager stood at the funeral and described her father as a loyal employee. That sentence haunted her more than the death itself. 30 years of sacrifice reduced to one cold sentence. After the funeral, Emily quietly dropped out of community college because there was no money left. No dramatic speech. No goodbye to classmates. She simply stopped showing up. Bills came first. Survival came first. Dreams could wait. Every morning before sunrise, she walked across Millfield to her dog-walking job on the north side of town. And every morning, she passed the same house. The Holloway house. The one with the dead garden and the permanently closed curtains. The townspeople had stories about the woman inside. Some said she poisoned her husband. Others said she spoke to herself through the walls. Kids dared each other to touch the mailbox and run away screaming. Emily never paid attention to gossip because poor people don't really have the luxury of wasting energy on stories that don't feed them. Still, even she felt uneasy when passing the property. There was something about the silence surrounding the place that felt heavy, like grief that had settled into the walls and refused to leave. Then came October 14th. The morning everything changed. Emily had just finished an overnight diner shift and was heading toward her second job when she heard something from behind the gate. At first she thought it was an injured animal. A low sound. Weak. Strained. Then she realized it was a person. She stopped walking. Her instincts told her to keep moving. She was already late. She couldn't afford trouble. But there are moments in life when something inside you refuses to let you walk away. Emily pushed open the rusted gate and climbed the cracked porch steps. She knocked once. No answer. She knocked again, harder this time. Then slowly, the door opened. The woman standing there looked nothing like the monster the town had imagined. Evelyn Holloway was tiny, frail, dressed in an old blue robe with trembling hands gripping the frame of the door. But what struck Emily most were her eyes. They weren't dangerous eyes. They were frightened eyes. The eyes of someone who had spent years waiting for something terrible to happen. Evelyn stared at her for several seconds before speaking. "You're not from the grocery store?" she whispered. Emily shook her head and said, "No, ma'am. I heard you from the road. I thought maybe you needed help." Evelyn closed her eyes for a moment and said something Emily would never forget for the rest of her life. "I was afraid nobody was coming." Evelyn had fallen in her kitchen the night before and bruised her hip badly enough that she couldn't stand properly. She had been lying on the floor for hours before finally dragging herself to the couch. Emily helped her sit down, made tea in a dusty kitchen that looked frozen in time, and stayed long enough to make sure she was okay. That should have been the end of it, but something about the old woman stayed with her. Maybe it was the loneliness in the house. Maybe it was the way Evelyn kept looking toward the door like she still couldn't believe somebody had actually stopped for her. The next morning, Emily returned to check on her. Then she came back again the following day. Soon the visits became routine. Over the next few weeks, Emily discovered that Evelyn Holloway was one of the smartest people she had ever met. The old woman spoke about literature, architecture, politics, music, and finance with sharp precision. Her mind was alive even if the rest of her world had gone quiet. Emily found herself staying longer every visit, missing shifts, losing money she desperately needed. But for the first time in years, she felt something she hadn't felt since before her father died. Curiosity, hope, connection. One afternoon, Evelyn asked her, "Why do you keep coming back here?" Emily laughed softly and replied, "Because you're the most interesting person in this town." Evelyn stared at her for a second before letting out a rough, rusty laugh that sounded like it hadn't been used in years. That was the first moment Emily realized the woman the town called crazy had simply been forgotten for too long. But there was one subject Evelyn always avoided: a locked room at the end of the hallway, bundles of old letters stacked carefully in the dining room, and one name written repeatedly across faded envelopes: Claire. Emily never asked questions because she understood something most people didn't. Broken people speak when they're ready. And finally, one rainy evening, Evelyn began telling the truth. Claire Holloway was Evelyn's daughter, a gifted pianist, brilliant, ambitious, fiercely independent. When Claire was 19, she sat her mother down and confessed that she was gay. This was the early 1990s in a conservative town where people hid entire parts of themselves just to survive. Evelyn reacted badly. She admitted later that fear and pride spoke before love did. Claire left home days later, and she never returned. For 31 years, Evelyn wrote letters apologizing. Hundreds of them. Every birthday, every Christmas, every Mother's Day. Every single one came back unopened. Emily counted them one afternoon. 247 returned letters. Then she found something else. A trust document hidden inside an old file cabinet. One beneficiary listed: Claire Holloway. Current value: $6,400,000. Emily stared at the number in disbelief. Evelyn explained that the money came from her family's estate and had been sitting untouched for decades waiting for Claire to come home. Evelyn had lived modestly all those years because she refused to spend what belonged to her daughter. But Claire had no idea the money even existed. "You've been waiting all this time?" Emily asked quietly. Evelyn nodded and whispered, "I'm running out of time." That sentence changed everything. Emily decided they would find Claire. For nearly a month, she searched every night after work. College directories, academic websites, music conferences, old alumni pages. Finally, she found her. Claire Holloway Chin, professor of music history in Portland, Oregon. Married, successful, 51 years old. An entire life built thousands of miles away from Millfield. When Emily showed Evelyn the photograph on the laptop screen, the old woman touched the image gently with trembling fingers and cried without making a sound. Evelyn tried writing another letter but couldn't finish it. Finally, Emily offered to write it herself. "She'll recognize your handwriting," she explained. "She may never open it." Evelyn hesitated before finally agreeing. Emily wrote the letter honestly. No excuses, no manipulation. She described the years of regret, the unopened letters, the trust, the loneliness, the waiting. Then she mailed it and prayed. 3 weeks later, the phone rang. Claire was coming home. When Claire arrived in Millfield, Emily met her at the gate. The resemblance between mother and daughter was unmistakable. Same eyes, same hands, same guarded expression hiding decades of pain. Emily led her to the front door and stepped aside. What happened between them inside that hallway remained private. Emily sat on the porch for nearly 2 hours while the past finally confronted itself behind closed doors. Claire stayed 3 days. During those 3 days, something shifted inside the Holloway house. Not magically, not perfectly. Old wounds don't disappear overnight. But conversations finally happened that should have happened decades earlier. And when Claire learned about the trust, she sat silently for a long time before saying to her mother, "You could have lived your own life." Evelyn answered quietly, "I was trying to protect yours." Before leaving, Claire stopped beside Emily and asked, "What exactly did my mother give you?" Emily shrugged and smiled. "Books, advice, friendship." Claire studied her carefully and replied, "That's all." Emily nodded. That was enough. But the story didn't end there. As winter settled over Millfield, Evelyn slowly began changing. Curtains opened. Nurses visited. The garden was restored. And for the first time in years, she started thinking about the future instead of the past. Then one morning, she asked Emily a question that would alter the course of her life forever. "What did you really want to study before you dropped out?" Emily admitted she had always been fascinated by finance and community investment. She believed small loans and educational support could completely change struggling families. She even had business ideas saved on her phone that she'd never shown anyone. Evelyn read them carefully. Then she looked up and said, "You understand something most wealthy people never learn: the connection between money and dignity." A week later, Evelyn proposed something extraordinary. She wanted to fund Emily's education and help her create a community investment organization for struggling families in Millfield. Not charity, opportunity. Together, they launched the Forward Fund with an initial investment of $250,000 from Evelyn and matching contributions from Claire. The program offered small business loans, tuition grants, and startup capital to hardworking people ignored by traditional banks. The first loan went to a single mother named Denise who dreamed of opening a bakery after being rejected by 3 banks. Within 6 months, customers lined up around the block every Saturday morning. Then came a mechanic opening his own garage, a hairstylist opening a salon after working from her apartment for 15 years. A local family buying the town's failing hardware store before corporate chains could shut it down forever. Emily returned to school while managing the fund. Professors quickly noticed her intelligence. Investors noticed her results. National newspapers eventually noticed her story. Then another surprise surfaced during a financial review of Evelyn's estate. An investment account opened in 1965 by Evelyn's father had quietly compounded for decades untouched. Current value, $1.8 million. Evelyn decided to give the entire account to Emily. Emily cried when she told her mother. It was the first time in years she allowed herself to fully break down. Because for the first time since her father died, the future no longer felt impossible. She paid off her mother's debts, bought a modest home, reinvested the rest into the Forward Fund. And most importantly, she stayed in Millfield. Within 4 years, the Forward Fund had helped more than 380 families. The organization became nationally recognized for its incredibly low default rates and long-term success. Politicians cited it as a model for community investment. Wealthy firms offered Emily executive positions in larger cities. She refused every one of them. "The work is here," she always said. Evelyn Holloway passed away peacefully at 77 years old with Claire beside her. Before her death, she left Emily one final letter. Inside was a sentence Emily would carry forever. "The world is full of closed gates and people who walk past them every day. I only hope a few more people decide to stop." Today, the Holloway house still stands at the end of that road in Millfield, but the gate is no longer rusted shut. The garden blooms every spring. Families gather there for community meetings funded by the organization Emily built. Claire visits often, and every year, scholarships created in Evelyn's name help first-generation students attend college. Emily Carter is 27 years old now. She could have left town years ago. She could have chased money somewhere else. but she stayed where people needed her most. A few months ago, she noticed a woman crying quietly at a bus stop downtown. Most people walked past without looking. Emily sat beside her and asked one simple question. "Are you okay?" The woman stared at her in shock and whispered, "Nobody has asked me that in a very long time." Emily missed an important meeting that morning. Later, she said it was one of the best days she'd had in months. Because that was the real inheritance Evelyn Holloway left behind. Not the millions, not the house, not the investment fund. The real inheritance was the decision to stop for another human being when everyone else keeps walking. One tired girl heard a cry behind a rusted gate. She stopped. She knocked. And everything changed.